Radio Grand Lac.
Vos émissions préférées sont toutes sur Radio Grand Lac.
Your English Weekly. La chronique 100% en anglais de Radio Grand Lac avec Klaus.
Welcome to Your English Weekly today and every Tuesday during school periods at around 12:05, in which I interview a local personality about a passion of theirs in simple English at around B1 level. That's pre-intermediate. I have guests for the next two shows, but I wasn't able to find one for today, so I'm going to talk about one of my passions. If you want to be a guest at this show, don't be shy. Call me at my personal number at 0646519144. I would gladly welcome you. Today, I would like to speak about a passion of mine that might surprise you, since this is an English language program, Your English Weekly. But the financer of this program, Your English Workshop, also my employer, doesn't only teach English. We also teach other foreign languages, such as Spanish, German, which I also teach, you might have guessed because of my name, Klaus, and also Italian. And Italian is a passion of mine, and it's what I want to talk about today. And speaking about a language, also, it's just natural to speak about the country. So I'd like to speak about Italy as well and my relationship with it, and more specifically, with a focus on the beautiful city of Venice, which I just visited last week on my first holidays of this school year. I have a relationship with Italy because I am originally from New York. And as you might know, there has been a great volume of Italian immigration or emigration, depending on your standpoint, your viewpoint, of Italians to New York and to America in general, but mostly concentrated in the Northeast of the United States. So New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, those are the states where there's the biggest proportion of Italian Americans. And so it was very familiar to me to see slices of pizza being sold on every street corner, on every block, as you say. A block is a pâté de maison, and a slice of pizza is une part de pizza. And so like in Italy, you don't have to buy the entire pizza. You can also just buy a slice, une part of pizza on the go. And the meal times aren't so rigid as they are in France and Italy. When you're hungry, you eat. And that's one of the things I like about Italians. They are very natural, although they have a lot of similarities with the French in their love for food, their love of beautiful things, and their very high class, or should I say refined way of life, and a kind of savoir-vivre, which in Italian takes the form of dolce vita. They are, I think, a bit more in tune to just being flexible and open-minded. I'd even say intelligent. Okay, I admit that I probably have a positive bias to things Italian, much like you would have to a friend or a family member. I'll attribute their occasional, more than occasional, harsh, that means like impolite behavior, comportement, to their being natural. And I'll explain their clan or even mafioso mentality by their loyalty to family and to their village or whatever unity or unit, I should say, they believe in. And I will declare their vanity or even machism as charming. It's always difficult to describe and compare entire peoples. And as an internationalist in a kind of John Lennon way, I don't want to reinforce cliches and typical overused national divides. Nonetheless, it's interesting to have a larger picture and compare. And there are undeniable tendencies and differences in local, regional, and national behavior. I find Italians at ease in any circumstance, even when they yell at you. I've heard, by the way, foreigners who don't speak Italian, saying that it sounds like Italians are yelling at each other when they're just talking in a normal way for them. Italians have a kind of cool way of being popular. Popular in the sense that not high class. Their cuisine, for instance, their food isn't like the court food of France, court being la cour. It comes from very basic ingredients that people just use because they were poor, and they still are rather poor. Yes, not only do I know Italy from my childhood in New York, my godparents, ma marraine et mon parrain, my godparents were Italian. And I remember at my baptism, I was baptized very late. I'm not Christian in my eyes. It was just a social event. My mother instigated. So my godparents were Italian, and it was with them that I drank my first sip of wine. And Mrs. Giardina, that was her name, my mother, who was of German descent, would make fun of her behind her back, to be honest, that she lived for cleaning, and she not clean to live. Her house was so clean that I'm not sure of this, but as in several American families I have had the privilege of being in their houses, she covered the sofa with a kind of plastic cover so as not to dirty it. Yes, so the Italians have a tendency to be very clean in their interiors, in their houses, in their private property, and to totally neglect public property and common spaces. That's not always true. As I said, these are always just tendencies, but it is a tendency, I believe, and it's very interesting to observe. There are also a lot of paradox phenomena, as in many things. Like the Italians have this love for beauty. It's true that they tend to really appreciate beautiful things, not only in food and in architecture, in art, in clothes, in fashion, of course, but surprisingly, the peripheries, the suburbs of their towns are incredibly ugly and not well maintained. But I will not fall victim to the cliche of the lazy Italian or any cliche. I find, for instance, that they are in general hardworking and flexible. And I just traveled this week to the town I'd want to talk to you about, to Venice, by train with Trenitalia, which is the Italian equivalent of SNCF. It's the public train system, which was always punctual, for instance. It was just perfect. And their trains are actually, I know they're known for being late, but I have experienced some latenesses. But I lived there actually last year. I bought a house in Italy, and I lived and worked near Turin, last year. And anyway, on our trip to Venice, it was wonderful because we took like 10 trains all told, because we also went to Padova and Ravenna. Padova is part of the Veneto, which is the region of Venice, because Venice isn't only a town, it's also a region. And as you know, probably, Italy was only founded, unified, of course, under the Roman and then the Byzantine Empire, but as a modern state only in the end or the middle, around 1866 of the 19th century. And up to then, it was a bunch of federal, it is still a federal kind of collection of former republics and dukedoms, one of which was Venice. And for instance, Padova and the Lake Garda were part of the Venetian region, or the Republic, now region, then Republic. So I hesitated actually to further attract yet more attention to this tourist destination that is Venice, because mass tourism is definitely a major downside to this beautiful city. It's a victim of its own success. So many people go to Venice every year. As you know, probably, France and Italy are the two most visited countries by foreigners. Of course, that statistic is helped by the fact that countries are relatively close and small in Europe. But anyway, I hate being part of mass tourism and even suffering the solicitation of restaurant employees who try to lure you into their restaurant as soon as you even vaguely show an interest in their menu. And of course, I also hate all the tacky, that means kitsch, that means of bad taste, souvenir shops. But even that has some positive sides to it. It's quite a phenomenon just to look at all these things that happen in Venice. It's a very lively city, surprisingly so, and very big, actually. There are still 51,000 local inhabitants on the historical island, il centro storico of Venice. And the port is very busy. It fascinated me to see how, well, first of all, there are no cars, which is wonderful, except for the huge parking lot around the train station and the bridge. But inside of the Centro Storico, the historical center, there are no cars, and that makes it magical to start with. So this entire city with its 51,000 inhabitants, and especially probably 4 or 5 times that number of tourists at any given time, and even much more in summer and spring, they have to be supplied with all the things they need and want. And I observed how in the early mornings, because we got up early in the morning and walked around this beautiful town, around the maze of little streets. A maze is a labyrinth, you can also say in English. They have to be supplied by boat and muscle power, what they call in French, huile de coude. Yes, people would actually carry with little trolleys. A trolley is like a diable. With wheels, a little trolley, all the things that the people and tourists and inhabitants would need. And they would load and unload these gondolas, and not gondolas, all these little boats. And I actually proposed to help a few people, but they didn't accept. Yes, it's just amazing how there is actually life in the city. And for instance, even the tourist industry created an interesting phenomenon, for instance, of little dark alleys having very brightly lit shops. You walk through these tiny, tiny little streets, and there will be very bright light from these horrible souvenir shops. And some of them aren't so horrible. I actually like the glassblower art from Murano. It's very nice. And what I loved about the city, I'd been there before, but not as an adult, was just walking around it. I even fantasized of if I were to have insomnia, and if I weren't able to sleep one night, just walking around in the middle of the night through this maze of streets. I didn't do that, but we did walk around, I say we because I was with my partner, town in the not so touristy parts. And there actually are some not so touristy parts of this city. It's divided in 6 sestieri, which are quarters, almost like my hometown, New York, which is divided into 5 boroughs, 5 parts of town. And some of them aren't very, very busy, they're very rather authentic. There are even shops with washing machines, the machine à laver and things like that. You wouldn't expect it. And they are also supplied with by boat and by trolleys. Trolleys, just hand-used trolleys. And also supermarkets, little supermarkets. And so it was very, very interesting, just walking around the town and finding, for instance, beautiful deserted churches, like empty, almost cathedrals. And there was also, for instance, a hospital, which you go there if you have a problem into the emergency ward via boat, and there's a landing for boat ambulances. The police patrol via boat, and there wasn't a strong police presence, which was very touching to me. A very big town, especially if you count the tourists, with basically very little police presence. So it's just a sign of harmony and beauty. Also, that this beautiful town was not destroyed in the last wars in World War II. It was only bombed once in 1945 by the Royal Air Force, and it was a very targeted bombing of what they called l'Arsenal, which is like a fort in one of the lesser known quarters of the city. There's, for instance, also a cemetery island. They have a special island with a cemetery, which is quite interesting. And their subway system, their metro system, of course, is not a metro, but it's the vaporetti, which are the boats. And there's a map of the vaporetti, which looks like a subway, like a metro map, but they're all boats. It's wonderful. Well, I won't go into a detailed description of the history of Venice, but just for those who are interested how this beautiful town came to being. Well, it was a refuge for Roman citizens who fled the successive waves of barbaric invasion by the Huns and the Germanic tribes, and also Attila the Hun, for instance. And they would take refuge on these marsh-like islands. And there were some fissures as well. And it was a republic for about 1,000 years, from 800 to 1800, and a major financial and maritime power. You might forget that. It was like almost a superpower. Of course, the proportions were smaller in those days. It was also a staging area for the Crusades, the Croisades, between 1100 and 1300, and also the famous Battle of Lepanto, which was where the Europeans kind of had a major battle, still with rowboats, against the Ottoman Empire. It was a major point of commerce for silk, la soie, for grain, for spice, and also art from the 13th to 17th century. Oh, by the way, it's very funny. In Italian, they count the centuries differently. I'd almost say Westerners, I mean by non-Italians, count as the 13th century, they would call the Duecento, or we would call the 19th century the Ottocento. They forget the 1,000 years, and they don't count, and they're off by one century. So it's just funny. Yes, the city-state of Venice was also the first financial power, already in the 9th century, and with its greatest prominence in the 14th century. And the Venetian arsenal, where they produced the ships, at one point there were, I believe, 3,300 Venetian boats. I don't know if we could really call them ships, but rather big boats. They were produced there. And, Napoleon, as so many other places, he defeated Venice. And in 1866, after some turmoil, it re-became a city-state in the meantime, and was also occupied by Austria. It became part of the Kingdom of Italy. But before that, of course, the highlight of Venice was between the 14th and the 16th century with the Renaissance, Rinascimento. It was the birthplace of Vivaldi. And there is a problem that Venice faces, and I won't be able to talk more in depth about my other loves for Italy and all that, but I'll just talk about this problem of Venice being flooded. Flooded is inondé. Of course, Venice is at sea level, basically, And the lagoon that Venice is in is often flooded. The town is. There was one big flood in 1966 where the water went over 1 meter and 90 centimeters higher than median sea level, which was measured in the 19th century, by the way. So it's a bit higher today. And so under Berlusconi and amongst many corruption scandals, they started a pharaonic project where there were like floatable platforms that were set up on the seafloor around the lagoon. And when there was a very high tide, these barriers were to rise and protect the lagoon and Venice, especially against floods. It took a long time for it to be put into place, and unfortunately, it was not put into operation for the big flood of 2019, which was the biggest one after 1966, where it went over 1 meters and 80 centimeters. But it was put into operation in 2020 and saved the Piazza San Marco, which is a central piazza of Venice, from a little flood. It wasn't as big as the 1966 and 2019 one. Okay, well, I think we're running out of time here. And I invite you once again to check out our website at yourlanguageworkshop.com, not only for English classes and activities, but also for Italian classes. And don't hesitate to call me at 06 46 54 9144 if you want to be a guest at this program every Tuesday at 12:05. I'm looking forward to seeing you next week.